December 19th, 1979. It was 6 days before Christmas. The Westdale Mall in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, was packed with holiday shoppers. Families, couples, teenagers laughing and browsing store windows. And among them was an 18-year-old girl named Michelle Martinko. She was blonde. She was beautiful. She was a senior at Kennedy High School. A straight-A student, a baton twirler, a performer in school choirs and theater productions. The kind of girl that lit up every room she walked into. That evening, Michelle had attended a Christmas banquet for her school's concert choir at the Sheraton Inn nearby. She was dressed beautifully, a black jersey dress, black heels, a white and brown rabbit fur jacket. She looked radiant. After the banquet, she asked a friend if she wanted to join her for a quick shopping trip to Westdale Mall. Her friend said no, so Michelle went alone. She just needed to pick up one thing, a new coat she had been saving up for. It should have taken 20 minutes. She never came home. And this is where the story truly begins. I want to be honest with you. When I first read about this case, it hit me hard. Because this was not a complicated person. This was not someone who had enemies. This was an 18-year-old girl who just wanted to buy a coat. And somewhere out there, a dangerous person, capable of unimaginable cruelty, was waiting. The world has people like that in it. And Michelle had no way of knowing she would cross paths with one that night. At 4 in the morning, December 20th, 1979, a mall security guard discovered Michelle Martinko's body slumped inside her family's tan 1972 Buick in the parking lot. She had been stabbed 29 times, primarily in the face and neck. Her hands bore deep defensive wounds. She had fought back hard until the very end. And yet, despite those defensive wounds, despite the blood she drew from her attacker, her killer walked away that night. And he kept walking. For 40 years. My name is Stephen, and this is the story of Michelle Martinko, the Iowa cold case that took 4 decades, 2 DNA databases, and 1 discarded plastic straw to finally solve. Truly understand the weight of what happened on that December night, you first have to understand who Michelle Martinko was. Michelle was born on October 6, 1961, in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, the younger of 2 daughters of Albert and Janet Martinko. She grew up in a close, loving family on the southwest side of the city, not far from where Westdale Mall would eventually be built. At Kennedy High School, Michelle was exactly the kind of student every teacher remembers fondly. Above average grades, a genuine work ethic, a natural performer who joined the baton twirling squad as a sophomore and sang in the school choir. She was also, by every account, strikingly beautiful. And that beauty, unfortunately, sometimes made her life complicated. Classmates speculated that jealousy from other girls kept Michelle from forming many close friendships. She had a small, tight circle, but not many confidantes. What Michelle did have, though, was a clear vision of her future. She had applied to Iowa State University to study interior design. She was excited about college. She had plans, dreams, a whole life waiting for her. On the evening of December 19th, 1979, Michelle was in good spirits. The Christmas banquet had been beautiful. She was dressed up. She felt good. She just needed to make one quick stop at the mall on her way home. She parked her family's tan Buick in the parking lot. She walked inside, and at some point that evening, in the cold, dark parking lot of a busy shopping mall, she crossed paths with someone who would destroy everything she had ever hoped for. We don't know exactly what happened in those final minutes. We may never know exactly. But we know what the evidence showed, and we know that Michelle, even in her final moments, did not give up without a fight. When mall security found Michelle at 4 in the morning, the scene inside that Buick told a story of sheer terror and incredible courage. She had been stabbed 29 times. The wounds were concentrated on her face, neck, and upper body. There was no evidence of sexual assault. Nothing had been stolen from her purse. This was not a robbery. This was not random. And I want you to understand something important here. This was not an impulsive act. This was not a moment of rage. The person who attacked Michelle that night came prepared. Gloves already on his hands, a plan already in his mind. This was a calculated, premeditated attack, carried out by someone who knew exactly what he was doing. A mastermind hiding behind the face of an ordinary man. And that is what makes this case so deeply unsettling, because nobody around him had any idea. The defensive wounds on Michelle's hands told investigators something critical. She had fought back against her attacker with everything she had. She had grabbed at the blade. She had scratched and clawed. And in doing so, she had drawn her attacker's blood. Blood that was not Michelle's was found on the gear shift of the car. And on Michelle's clothing. At the time, in 1979, DNA analysis as we know it today did not exist. That blood evidence was collected and preserved. But there was very little that investigators could immediately do with it beyond what basic forensics allow. Police also noted something chilling about the attack itself. There was no blood found outside the vehicle. That meant Michelle had been attacked inside the car, after returning to it in the parking lot. Whoever attacked her had either been waiting for her at the car or had followed her from the mall. No fingerprints were found on the door handles or inside the vehicle, suggesting the attacker had been wearing gloves. This was not impulsive. Someone had come prepared. Cedar Rapids police interviewed nearly 200 people in the weeks that followed. They looked at Michelle's former boyfriend. They looked at friends, acquaintances, anyone who might have had reason to hurt her. A $10,000 reward was offered for information. Almost nothing useful came in. By 1986, just 7 years after the murder, Cedar Rapids investigator Matt Denlinger would later tell CBS's 48 Hours this case was sitting on ice, completely cold. The trail had gone dark. Michelle's parents, Albert and Janet Martinko, spent the rest of their lives without ever knowing who had taken their daughter from them. They both died without answers. For almost 3 decades, the Michelle Martinko case sat in a file, reviewed occasionally, never forgotten by the detectives who worked it, but with nowhere to go. The 1980s passed. Then the 1990s. Then the 2000s arrived. Somewhere in Iowa, a man was living his life. He had a job. He had a family. He was known in his community as a hard worker, a normal person, a business owner, a neighbor, and he carried a secret that no one around him suspected. In 2006, 27 years after Michelle's murder, a cold case detective named Doug Larison sat down with the old evidence boxes from the Martinko case. He went through everything methodically, and he found something that had been overlooked. Blood scrapings taken from the car's gear shift had been sent for DNA testing years earlier, but the results had never been fully followed up on. In the chaos of an ongoing investigation, the paperwork had slipped through the cracks. Detective Larison had the evidence retested using updated forensic techniques. This time, investigators identified a full male DNA profile from the blood on the gear shift and additional DNA from Michelle's dress. The killer's DNA, right there, preserved for 27 years. Investigators entered the profile into CODIS, the National Combined DNA Index System, the FBI's database of DNA from convicted criminals. They waited. No match came back. Whoever this person was, he had never been convicted of a crime. He was not in the system. He had spent 27 years as a ghost. But technology was about to change everything. and this is something I think about a lot. For 27 years, hundreds of investigators, interviews, and leads could not crack this case. But technology, the kind that didn't even exist when Michelle was killed, did what no human effort could. This is why we live in a remarkable time, because today, a killer cannot simply wait out the clock. Science is patient. Evidence doesn't forget. And justice, no matter how long it takes, has a way of finding its path. In 2017, Cedar Rapids investigators took a bold new step. They hired a private company specializing in DNA phenotyping, a cutting-edge technique that can estimate a person's physical appearance based solely on their genetic material. The company produced a composite image of what the killer likely looked like, estimated age, hair color, facial structure, all derived from the DNA left behind in that parking lot in 1979. It was a face, a general description, but still no name. Then in 2018, investigators took the most important step of the entire investigation. They uploaded the killer's DNA profile to GEDmatch, a publicly available genealogy database where ordinary people upload their own DNA test results to trace their family trees. This technique, known as forensic genetic genealogy, had only recently become viable for law enforcement. And what happened next was remarkable. GEDmatch returned a result. One person in the database shared DNA markers with the unknown killer. Based on the degree of the match, investigators determined this person was likely the killer's second cousin once removed. That person had no idea what her DNA had just unlocked. Her name was Brandy Jennings, a 40-year-old woman from Vancouver, Washington. She had uploaded her DNA to GEDmatch years earlier simply to learn more about her father's family history, and then completely forgotten about it. Starting from Brandy's family tree, investigators began building outward. They contacted DNA-tested relatives. They eliminated branches one by one. They narrowed the suspects down to 3 brothers, all of whom had grown up in Manchester, Iowa, a small town about 70 miles from Cedar Rapids. Investigators placed all 3 brothers under surveillance. They needed DNA from each of them, obtained without alerting any of the men. The first 2 brothers were cleared. The third brother was a 64-year-old man named Jerry Lynn Burns. He was a local business co-owner. He had a family. He had no criminal record. In October 2018, an investigator watched Jerry Burns visit a Pizza Ranch restaurant in Manchester. When Burns finished eating and got up to leave, he left behind the plastic straw he had been using. The investigator collected it from the trash. The DNA on that straw was tested against the blood from the 1979 crime scene. It was an exact match. Think about what this moment meant. For 39 years, Michelle's family had lived with the unbearable weight of not knowing. There were days, probably many days, when they had silently accepted that this case would never be solved, that her killer would never be found, that justice would simply never come. And then, from the most unexpected place imaginable, a plastic straw at a small-town restaurant changed everything. Nobody in that family could have predicted this moment. But it came. It finally came. After 39 years. The same blood Michelle had drawn from her attacker while fighting for her life had finally named him. On December 19, 2018. Exactly 39 years to the day after Michelle Martinko was murdered. Investigators drove to Jerry Burns' home in Manchester, Iowa, and arrested him. The date was not a coincidence. Investigators chose it deliberately. The arrest sent shockwaves through the small community of Manchester. Jerry Burns was not a stranger here. He had lived here for decades. He co-owned a truck stop. People knew him, liked him, trusted him. One man who had known Burns for 40 years told local news, and I want you to hear this. because it captures exactly what made this case so disturbing. You'd have a hard time convincing me that Jerry did this. I just could not believe that. That is the reality of predators who are never caught. They become respected members of communities. They build lives. They have families who love them, and the people around them have no idea what they are capable of. When investigators sat down to interview Burns, his response was chilling in its calmness. He claimed he had never met Michelle Martinko. He claimed he was not there that night. He could not explain why his DNA would be present at the crime scene. And when investigators told him point blank that they were arresting him for Michelle's murder, he showed, according to investigators, almost no emotion. When asked directly if he had killed someone in 1979, Jerry Burns reportedly told investigators again and again, test the DNA. They had. It matched. Burns was charged with first-degree murder and taken into custody. He was 64 years old. Michelle Martinko had been 18 when he killed her. Let that sink in for a moment. Jerry Burns was 25 years old when he took Michelle's life. He then lived for 39 more years, completely free. He grew older. He built a business. He celebrated birthdays and holidays. He watched the world change around him. And all that time, Michelle's family waited. They grieved. They hoped. They lost hope. And they hoped again. That is not just a tragedy. That is one of the longest tests of patience and faith that any family should ever have to endure. And they endured it with a dignity that is truly humbling. Jerry Lynn Burns went to trial in February 2020. The prosecution's case rested heavily on the DNA evidence, the blood from the gear shift, the DNA from Michelle's dress, the match to the straw. The science was overwhelming. Burns pleaded not guilty. His defense team argued that the DNA evidence was unreliable, that there were alternative explanations for how his DNA could have ended up at the scene. They suggested contamination, transfer, anything that might create reasonable doubt. The jury was not persuaded. On February 24, 2020, 40 years, 2 months, and 5 days after Michelle Martinko was murdered, a jury of his peers convicted Jerry Lynn Burns of first-degree murder. On August 7, 2020, Burns was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He has been incarcerated at Anamosa State Penitentiary ever since. After sentencing, Burns hired Kathleen Zellner, the high-profile attorney famous for representing Stephen Avery in the Netflix documentary Making a Murderer, to appeal his conviction. Zellner argued that investigators had violated Burns' constitutional rights by collecting his DNA from the discarded straw without a warrant. In March 2023, the Iowa Supreme Court unanimously rejected that appeal. Jerry Lynn Burns will die in prison, and I think this case teaches us something important. Something that goes beyond just one man and one crime. Jerry Burns spent 39 years thinking he had gotten away with it. He built a life. He smiled at neighbors. He celebrated holidays. But justice has a long memory. Every single wrong action carries a consequence. If not today, then tomorrow. If not in 1 year, then in 40. No one truly escapes what they have done. And that is the most powerful lesson this case leaves behind. That we must never harm another person. Never cause pain or loss to another human being. Because the weight of that wrong will follow you. It followed Jerry Burns for 39 years, and in the end, it caught him. I want to take a moment here, before the closing, to talk about the people who carried this weight the longest. Michelle's parents, Albert and Janet Martinkos, spent the rest of their lives without answers. They died not knowing who had killed their daughter, not knowing if justice would ever come, carrying that grief every single day for decades. Michelle's older sister Janelle carried the weight too. She gave a statement at Burns' sentencing, describing what it felt like to watch her family's decades of heartache finally turn, even slightly, towards something that resembled hope. There is also one detail in this case that I find both deeply moving and almost impossible to process. Michelle's defensive wounds, the cuts on her hands from fighting back against her killer, are the reason this case was solved. When Michelle grabbed at the blade, she cut her killer. His blood fell onto the gear shift, onto her dress, and it stayed there, preserved, for 40 years. As John Stonebreaker, Michelle's brother-in-law, put it at the trial, Michelle's injuries helped make her her own best witness. She fought back, and that fight ultimately brought justice. There is a saying that has stayed with me while researching this case. Shoot for the moon. Even if you miss, you'll land among the stars. Michelle fought back with everything she had. She did not win that night. She could not save herself. But that fight, those final desperate moments of courage, left behind the one thing that would eventually bring her justice. She missed the moon, but she landed among the stars, because 40 years later, her killer was sitting in a courtroom because of her. She became her own best witness, and in the end, she won. Not in time for her parents to see it, not in time for her to know, but it came. Michelle Martinko was 18 years old. She was going to study interior design at Iowa State University. She had plans, dreams, and a future full of possibility waiting for her. On the last night of her life, she was dressed up and happy, coming home from a Christmas banquet. She just needed to make one quick stop. She never made it home. For 40 years, her killer lived freely. He had a family, a business, a reputation. He sat at Christmas dinners. He celebrated holidays. He grew old, and the blood he left behind in that parking lot waited patiently. Technology caught up. Investigators never gave up, and a young woman who uploaded her DNA to a genealogy website just to learn about her family history became, without ever knowing it, the key that unlocked everything. Michelle Martinko deserved to grow old. She deserved to go to college, to build a career, to fall in love, to have a family of her own. Instead, her legacy is this. She is one of the first major cold cases in American history to be solved through forensic genetic genealogy. Her case paved the way for dozens of other families to find justice. She became her own best witness, and she helped change the future of cold case investigation. If this story meant something to you, if you believe that names like Michelle's deserve to be remembered, please subscribe to this channel. Every week, we tell the stories of real people whose lives mattered and whose names should never be forgotten, because every name deserves to be known. Thank you for watching.